Hello everybody, welcome to today's midweek thought for the day. It's Thursday, it's just getting dark, so I've put the candles on. So it's time for us to have a think about today's topic, and today we're thinking about the events in John 11 and the beginning of John 12, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. So it's a great long passage and it's a good read, so I would kind of encourage you, even if you want to press pause at this point, to go and read John 11 and John 12, the beginning of John 12, but I'm not going to read it all now because that does take a long time. The sort of summary of the story is that Jesus has these really good friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, their brother and two sisters, and they live together in Bethany, which is a place close to Jerusalem, very close to Jerusalem. And Lazarus is ill and he dies. Jesus is at that time staying away from Jerusalem because of the trouble brewing there. There's a huge amount of political trouble there, and so he stays away, and he gets the message that Lazarus is ill, and they ask him to go, and Jesus has to decide whether or not to go. Then we get this bit in John chapter 11 in verse 16, when they're just deciding whether or not they are about to go to Lazarus. It's Thomas, who is called the twin. Thomas is my favourite disciple because he asks the questions no one else is brave enough to ask. But he grasps things, Thomas. Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Thomas is fully aware that going to that close to Jerusalem at that time is very, very dangerous. So Jesus goes to Bethany, 2 miles away from Jerusalem, not far at all. And lots of Jewish people had come to grieve with Mary and Martha to console them about their brother. And Jesus is really, really upset by the whole situation there. It actually says in 11, beginning verse 32, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So we're in this kind of cliffhanger situation. What is Jesus going to do, especially with everybody watching him? So Jesus tells them to take away the stone, and Martha, who's the sensible sister, says it will just be so smelly, there will be a stench because he's been dead for 4 days. And Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb. Lazarus comes out of the tomb, not like Jesus came out of the tomb, leaving the grave clothes behind. Lazarus comes out wrapped in the grave clothes, and he has to be unbound from those. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." And then this leads us into the end of chapter 11, where it starts the plot to kill Jesus. Now, it may seem extraordinary that this is happening at this point, that this man who can raise the dead is about to be killed. We'll come on to that in a minute. So this is chapter 11, verse 45. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day they planned to put him to death. Another moment. So they are planning that they need to kill Jesus. It's strange. And sometimes we find this really hard to access this passage. And then we have this other part of it as well. So just there's Mary anoints Jesus, but then in the end of verses 9, 10 and 11 of chapter 12, it says this: when the great crowd of the Jews learned that he was there, they came not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death as well, since it was on account of him that many of the Jews were deserting and believing in Jesus. So we have this really complicated situation about life and death, choosing life, choosing death, choosing that people should die and that they would need to die. So going back and reading The Wrong Messiah by Nick Page, again looking at what he has said about this, he really talks a lot about the political situation and about how fragile some of the situations here are, that we maybe don't appreciate their precariousness. So we've got the bigger political precariousness of the whole situation. So I'd forgotten, if I knew this, that the Romans kept the holy vestments hostage because they knew it was important. The Jews had this kind of very fragile relationship with the Romans. So the Romans kept the holy vestments, and Caiaphas had to go and ask for them if he wanted them. He would have to go to the Romans and go, can I have my vestments back? And by the way, can we just have them back? And the Romans would go, no, you can have them for this festival, then they have to come back to the Roman keeping. So there was this kind of power struggle going on about the vestments. And then they had this fudge, which you could say, critics would say, would make Anglicans proud. Church of England sort of fudge, beautiful. It's a very clever fudge. In that everywhere, all the cities that were under Roman occupation were required to make a sacrifice to the emperor. Well, the Jews were never going to sacrifice to the emperor. They made a daily sacrifice for the emperor and his family, praying for the emperor. So they were living in this really fragile situation. So Caiaphas really believes and understands that if Jesus stirs up too much trouble, then the Romans will obliterate all the Jews, that the faith will die, Jerusalem will be razed, and it will be the end of God's promise, because Caiaphas is holding on to God's promise being fulfilled through the Israelite nation, through their faith for everyone. So that is one precarious thing that's happening. The other really precarious thing that's happening on a kind of miniature level, and it kind of is, you have this kind of very personal precariousness and this kind of whole situational precariousness. Mary and Martha are only ever described as Lazarus' sister. We don't actually know how old they are, but they're nobody's widow, they're nobody's wife, they are only Lazarus' sisters. So at this point in the narrative where Lazarus has died, they are about to lose control of their home, because Lazarus' inheritance will go to their nearest male relative. So they have this kind of precariousness. I mean, someone I worked alongside a few years ago went to Africa, having been recently widowed. She was in Uganda, and they said to her, well, when are your husband's family coming to take your house back? Because that can still happen in the ways that societies are organising themselves. And she said, well, actually that's not how it works here, but it is kind of an example of how Mary and Martha were their lives were so precarious in that situation. We don't actually I don't know if we know what happens to them in the long term. I'm not sure. I think I need to look into that a bit more. But in the immediacy, they're in a very, very precarious situation. And Jesus is really, really disturbed and upset and moved and agitated, and he weeps. And then some people say, why is he so upset when he knows he's going to heal Lazarus, when he's going to bring Lazarus back to life? And Nick Page suggests, probably more eloquently than I'm about to say, that Jesus is just disturbed by the wrongness of it all. By the wrongness of the occupation, by the wrongness of him being forced away from Jerusalem, by the wrongness of the kind of whole way that things were sorting out in the nation and in the society, and the wrongness for his friends, for Mary and Martha. And so he is just completely disturbed and weeps. So he weeps with grief for Lazarus, for his friends, and for the whole of the nation. And he knows that actually raising Lazarus from the dead, he will die again humanly, is to do with this whole, it's only going to scratch the surface of the whole wrongness of everything that's wrong. This passage, these passages, chapters 11 and 12, talk a lot about death and dying and resurrection. And I think it's something which we need to think more about and less about. We need to be resolved in ourselves as Christians that, death will come and it's part of life. A few years ago, I was privileged to be at a funeral service which I wasn't leading. And the person leading the service was brave enough to say, and this person who was young and had died in a tragic accident, and he said, this person is the only person who is alive. The rest of us are dying. And I thought, wow, that is a really brave thing to say. But actually to have spoken that into that situation was really important, because that is what we believe as Christians, that while we are here on earth, we are dying and then we will be alive. We are dying, but then we will be alive. And when we have grasped that, that is incredibly liberating. That brings to us a sense and a certainty and understanding of God's love, that it's eternal. We believe that we are eternal beings made and then made for eternity, but our time here on earth must be important, otherwise God wouldn't have bothered. But we will be travelling through human death to life. And that is something which we will think about again in this journey through Lent and Easter to the resurrection. We think about the images of heaven for us, of what it's like, about a feast or a safe pasture or somewhere which is a place where God is very real and very present with us, and that there will be no more tears. But none of this defeats God's love for us. Have a read through chapter 11 and chapter 12 of John's Gospel, and think about the things which are held in balance here about life and death and life. And then if you have time, skip on to the end of John's Gospel, and Jesus is there in his resurrection body, cooking bread and fish for his friends. I said this morning at Cologne that I don't know whether in heaven that there will only be bread and fish, because that's all that we know that Jesus can cook. But it doesn't matter if we don't understand. It is going to be all right. because of this great love of God which is demonstrated for us, which Jesus came to show us, however difficult that was. So as we look forward towards Easter and the resurrection, and we remember our friends who have passed on, I love the phrase promoted to glory. Let us try and settle that truth deep within us, that whilst we may all be dying, we will then all be alive. I'll see you again very soon. Please do be in touch if there's anything that you need, and let me know, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.